He grew up hearing the sound of power, signing contracts, giving orders, changing destinies with a single word. But he never knew how to listen, until he met a woman who didn't listen with her ears, but with her soul. Helena had been deaf. Since her teenage years, a literature teacher, strong, brilliant, principled, and completely immune to the arrogant charm of a CEO used to being obeyed. What was supposed to be a clash of worlds turned into a story no one could have written, and one you won't be able to stop watching. A light rain fell over Manhattan, like a curtain hiding the chaos of a city always in a rush. Damian Blake, CEO of Blake Enterprises, stormed out of a tense meeting. The driver was missing, the umbrella didn't work, and his already short temper had run out. As he tried to cross the street, texting on his phone, he barely saw the woman walking slowly. Ahead, brakes screeched. The dry sound of the bumper brushing her body echoed like thunder through the silence. She fell to the wet pavement, books scattered around her. Damian jumped out of the car, furious, blaming everything except himself. "Are you blind? Didn't you see the car coming?" he snapped. The woman looked at him silently, then pulled a small notebook from her bag. With steady handwriting, she wrote, "I'm fine, I'm deaf, but maybe you should pay more attention." He was speechless. Used to having the last word, he'd just been outdone by someone who didn't say a single one. She got up, gathering, her books like someone piecing their dignity back together. Even soaked and bruised, there was a calm strength in her stance. Damian reached for his phone, maybe to call for help, maybe to escape the moment. But she was already walking away, not leaving room for another sound. On the sidewalk, a young student ran up to her, yelling, "Miss Helena!" She smiled, made a gesture with her hands, and walked away with him as if nothing had happened. Damian watched her vanish into the crowd, unsettled by something he couldn't name. Traffic resumed. The city's chaotic symphony picked up again, but inside him, her silence still echoed. Hours later, in his mirrored high-rise, Damian stared blankly at contracts. Numbers danced on the screen, but his mind kept circling back to the woman with the unwavering eyes. Who was she? And why did her presence leave him so restless? He typed into the browser, "Deaf Teacher Manhattan." There she was. Helena Duarte, literature teacher at a public school in Brooklyn. He clicked on a short news video. Helena spoke through an interpreter, but her gestures and expressions said more than any dubbing. She defended keeping the school from being demolished for a new commercial center. Damian felt a chill seeing the name of the project. It belonged to his own company. In 1 week, 2 collisions, both involving Helena. The next day, breaking all his habits, Damian went to Brooklyn. He told himself it was just to see the resistance up close, but deep down he knew there was more. Curiosity, irritation, maybe something deeper he didn't dare name. The school was modest, with graffiti on the walls and children running through the halls. But there was life and respect, rare things in his world. In the reading room, he found Helena sitting in a circle with the students. She read a Shakespeare passage in sign language, her eyes glowing. The children followed along in awe, translating each sign like a graceful dance. He stood in the doorway, hypnotized. No one needed to speak loudly to be heard. Helena saw him. For a second, her gaze wavered, then returned to its usual firmness. She thanked the students, waved goodbye with gentle gestures, and walked toward him. Without a word, she pointed to an empty chair and sat across from him. Damian pulled out his phone and wrote, "I want to understand why this school matters so much to you." She read it, took a breath, and replied in her notebook, "Because here, kids learn they have a voice, even if the world doesn't listen." Something shifted inside Damian. It was as if each of her words dismantled part of his armor, and he didn't know whether to resist or let it fall. She handed the notebook back with a faint smile, as if she already knew his type. "You people think you can buy everything, but listening, that takes more than money." Damian stared at the sentence, and for the first time, he had no comeback. In that simple room, among worn-out books and noisy children, he felt small and intrigued by the woman who didn't speak, but said everything with her eyes. As he left, he looked back. Helena had already returned to her reading circle, as if he were just another visitor, but something in him already knew. She wasn't just passing through. She was the kind of person who changes everything, without shouting, without asking permission, just by being whole, even in silence. In the car, the driver tried to make small talk, but Damien waved him off. He closed his eyes, still seeing her among the students. That woman had something he couldn't explain. And for the first time, he wanted to understand, not as a CEO, but as a man. At the office, his partners waited with numbers, targets, urgency. But Damien stared out the window, uninterested. His mind was elsewhere, in a modest neighborhood, in a classroom, in a notebook with sentences that said more than any boardroom. That night, he didn't go to his usual restaurant, didn't call the ex who still tried to reach him. He sat on the couch, opened a blank note, and wrote a single question. How do you hear what isn't said? And for the first time, Damien Blake realized he had never truly listened, but he was willing to try. In the following days, Damien split his time between business meetings and thoughts of Helena. She lingered in his mind like a note out of tune. Unsettling, unexpected, but impossible to ignore. Something about her defied everything he knew: ambition, power, image, status. And that drew him in more than he could explain. How could someone who'd never spoken a word to him have such an impact? He decided he needed to know more, not out of control, but necessity. He called his assistant and asked for a full report on Helena Duarte. Name, age, education, work, projects. Everything they could find. She found it odd, but complied. It was rare to see him personally interested in anyone outside the corporate world. Hours later, the file was on his desk. Helena was 29, with a degree in literature and a specialization in comparative literature. She had lost most of her hearing at 15 due to a misdiagnosed case of meningitis. Since then, she had learned sign language, adapted her life, and never allowed her deafness to limit her dreams. She currently taught literature to at-risk teens in Brooklyn. She was also the creator of a reading program gaining local media attention. Damien read everything in silence, as if each paragraph unlocked a door inside him. Her achievements weren't inherited, they were built: effort, resilience, intelligence, and above all, purpose. Qualities he secretly admired, but hadn't seen in someone in a long time. She was rare, and he was increasingly sure of it. Days later, his company held a meeting with community representatives to discuss the development. Damien decided to go in person, surprising the executives. He was tired of making decisions from glass-walled offices with filtered air. He wanted to see the faces of the people who would be affected. And of course, he wanted to see Helena again. The meeting was held in a public library in Brooklyn with plastic chairs and coffee and thermoses. Helena was already there, sitting in the front row, surrounded by parents and teachers. When she saw him enter, she raised an eyebrow, not surprised, as if she expected him. Damien nodded. She responded with a brief, polite, but firm gesture. When it was her turn to speak, she declined the microphone and pointed to an interpreter. She spoke in sign language, fluently and passionately, eyes fixed on Damien. She defended the school, the neighborhood, and the educational project with poise and strength. It was impossible not to hear her, even for those who didn't know sign language. Damien watched, mesmerized. It wasn't just speech, it was presence, truth, courage. The audience gave her a standing ovation, and he could only swallow, hard. When it was his turn to speak, his words felt disconnected. Nothing seemed adequate after what she had conveyed without uttering a single sound. After the meeting, they crossed paths outside, beneath the yellow light of old street lamps. She held a binder and her notebook. Damien approached, hands in his pockets, masking his discomfort. "You're a force of nature, Helena," he said, looking into her eyes. She smiled gently and wrote, or maybe I just got used to not being heard, "It teaches you to stand firm." He read it and replied without thinking, "I wish I had half your courage." She made a slow, expressive gesture with her hands. He didn't understand and asked what it meant. She wrote, "Don't say what you haven't lived. Courage isn't in words." Then she turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the silence. In the following days, Damien couldn't return to his routine as before. Meetings felt repetitive, the numbers empty. He started watching videos about sign language, signed up for an online course. He told no one. It was something he did for himself, and maybe for her. During a conversation with his financial advisor, he mentioned reconsidering the demolition project. He was met with shock and resistance. "It'll ruin our profit forecasts," they said. But Damien stood firm. For the first time in years, it felt good to defy expectations. He began thinking of alternatives, ways to include the school, not erase it. Helena's voice echoed in his mind like a constant reminder. One afternoon, he returned to the school unannounced. He waited until classes ended and found Helena in the teacher's lounge, organizing books. She saw him, but wasn't surprised. She simply pointed to a chair and sat in front of him just like before. Damien handed her a handwritten note. "I want to listen, not to respond, but to learn." Helena read it, then wrote, "Then start," with silence. And so they sat, for long minutes, side by side, without words. It wasn't awkward, it was intense. Damien had never been so present in a moment, and he discovered that sometimes what transforms us doesn't need to be said. Autumn began painting Brooklyn in shades of gold and rust. Leaves drifted slowly down, as if time had learned to respect the pace of things. Damien, once always in a rush, began to move with the more human rhythm of that neighborhood. For the third time that week, he went to Helena's school unannounced, and as always, she didn't seem surprised. This time, he didn't want to talk. He sat in the back of the room, between shelves of books and student projects. He watched an entire class, observing how Helena communicated with her students. There was grace in her gestures, strength in her expressions, and more emotion than he expected to see. She was a silent artist, shaping minds with her hands. A student raised her hand and signed something quickly. Helena responded with a smile and signed poetry. Damien didn't understand, but was fascinated by the exchange. There, no one needed a loud voice to be heard, and that made him question everything. He'd learned about leadership. After class, Helena approached with a piece of paper in her hand. She wrote, "You look uncomfortable. Are you okay?" Damien hesitated before replying, "I think I'm listening too much." She laughed, or rather smiled with her eyes, a sparkle he didn't expect. "Welcome to the silence," she wrote, "where the truth usually screams." In the days that followed, Damien began studying sign language more seriously. He watched videos, practiced with a virtual tutor, trained in front of the mirror. It wasn't easy. It demanded attention, presence, and humility. But for the first time, he didn't feel the need to be the best. He just wanted to understand. One afternoon, while visiting the school again, Helena invited him for coffee with the teachers. A simple gesture, but full of meaning. Damien accepted. He sat at a worn wooden table, surrounded by voices and curious glances. Helena introduced him in sign language, and he replied with a clumsy gesture. But she smiled, approving the effort. During the conversation, Helena handed him a poem the students had written together. It was about listening, about what the world says when no one's paying attention. Damien read slowly, each verse hitting like a punch and a hug all at once. At the end, there was a dedication to those who choose to listen with their heart, even if they started late. Later, walking Helena to the subway, he dared to ask, "Do you miss hearing music?" She thought for a moment, then wrote, "I miss what I never knew, but I've learned to hear with my eyes." He fell silent, taking that in. And in that moment he understood it wasn't about loss, but transformation. The following week, an incident with one of the students changed everything. Jonas, 14, was nearly arrested after a misunderstanding at a convenience store. Helena rushed to the scene, and to her surprise, Damien was already there. He had been alerted by a school staff member and decided to act. He spoke with the manager, called lawyers, and resolved everything quietly. After the ordeal, Helena sat waiting on the school steps. He arrived with heavy shoulders but honest eyes. She wrote, "Why did you do it?" Damien replied, "Because you would have done the same." And for the first time, she gently touched his hand. The gesture was brief, but full of meaning. It wasn't early romance. It was trust being planted. Damien felt it like a thread of light piercing the armor he still wore. Inside, he wondered, how could someone so silent make so much noise within him? Helena, in turn, was starting to see depth in the man she once thought shallow. On a rainy Saturday, he showed up with a bouquet of wildflowers and a folded note. "Dinner," it read shyly. Helena looked up and signed, "Only if it's simple." That night, they ate soup and bread on a covered porch, surrounded by books and candles, and they spoke, with hands, glances, and silence. Damien told her about his mother, who had died of cancer when he was 24. He said he never really said goodbye, too busy trying to become someone important. Helena listened, her eyes glistening. She held his hand and wrote, "She would be proud of the man you're becoming." He bowed his head, touched in a way he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Rain tapped on the roof, creating a melody Helena couldn't hear, but still, she followed it with her eyes, feeling the world in her own way. Damien watched her, captivated by the lightness with which she existed, and he understood that real love was made of acceptance and presence. And there, in that moment, he was whole for the first time. When they said goodbye, Helena wrote one last sentence. "Sometimes, what isn't heard is what matters most." Damien smiled, folding the note and slipping it into his pocket like a treasure. In that shared silence, they had said everything, and they had no idea. It was only the beginning. The next morning, Damien spent hours rereading Helena's note. The words were simple, but echoed deeply. Sometimes what isn't heard is what matters most. He thought about all the people he had ignored, assistants, partners, even family. How often he had answered without really listening, and how ironic it was that a woman with no hearing was teaching him how to listen. During a business meeting, his partners talked about profits, goals, expansion. Damien was listening. But his mind was in Brooklyn. They didn't understand. What was bothering him? Only that he had changed. "You're different, Damien," one of them said, "quieter." And he simply replied, "Maybe because I've finally started to listen." That night he opened one of the boxes his mother had left behind. Inside were letters, poems, little notes she'd left before her travels. He realized he had never read them properly. He read them all in silence, eyes misty, and promised himself he would never again ignore the words that truly mattered. Days later, he ordered the school's reading room to be renovated, not as a CEO, but as someone who wanted to contribute quietly. When Helena found out, she didn't thank him with words. She simply looked at him and signed, "You're listening." And he knew in that moment that gesture meant more than any applause. On his way home, Damien walked through Brooklyn at a different pace. He no longer rushed nor tuned out the sounds around him. He stopped to watch children playing, heard the rustling leaves, the laughter of an elderly couple, and, deep in his chest, something new was growing. For the first time, he felt truly present and alive. It was a gray morning when Helena arrived at school and found the gate ajar. In the courtyard, Damien was talking to two workers, pointing to the library area. She watched from a distance, surprised at how naturally he now moved through that space. He no longer looked like a CEO in modest surroundings. He looked like someone searching for meaning. When their eyes met, he smiled, and she smiled back, heart skipping a beat. Later, Helena received a message from him. "I'm learning sign language. Still clumsy, but motivated. I want to talk to you the way you deserve." She replied with a selfie holding a sign language book and a thumbs up. It was the kind of exchange that said more than words ever could, and in that gesture, something deeper began to grow between them. The following week, a student locked himself in a classroom after losing a family member. Helena tried to reach him, but it was Damien who convinced the boy to open the door. He sat on the floor with him, simply being there in silence, then said softly, "You don't have to be strong right now. We just need to breathe." When the boy finally stepped out, Helena hugged Damien without hesitation. It was the first real touch between them. It wasn't romantic. It was real. And because of that, it left Helena shaken inside. She hadn't expected comfort from him. And yet, there he was, present, attentive, listening with something beyond hearing. That night, she wrote in her journal, "There are silences that comfort more than words, and he's learning to hear me." Meanwhile, Damien sat alone at home, staring at the wall full of notes and signs he was trying to memorize. He was determined to overcome his own rigidity, not for pride, but for true connection. Helena had awakened something rare in him, the desire to be better. Days later, Helena invited him to a small school reading event. It would be simple, but special. Students would present original texts and favorite poems. Damien hesitated. He didn't know if he was ready to show up in that space as just a man. But he accepted, because somehow he knew it mattered to her. He arrived on time, wearing a simple shirt and a quiet smile. The students performed in pairs, with sign language interpretation throughout. Helena watched him between readings, and Damien only had eyes for her. When a girl recited a poem about listening with your chest, he swallowed hard. It felt like those words had been written for him. At the end of the event, Helena approached with a cup of tea and a note. "You understood more than many who hear perfectly." Damien held the note for a moment before replying, "You taught me to listen to what was never spoken." And she smiled, recognizing the truth in his eyes. They walked together to the school gate, unhurried. The sky was beginning to brighten, even though it was late afternoon. Damien gently took her hand like someone asking permission to feel. She didn't pull away. She simply squeezed back. And there, in silence, they sealed a kind of promise. The next day, the rumors began. A business gossip columnist published a note. "Millionaire CEO seen with deaf teacher from Brooklyn. Unlikely romance or PR stunt?" Social media exploded with cruel comments, memes, and speculation. Helena read everything in silence, and for the first time in a long while, she felt afraid. Damien called immediately, offering support and protection. He said he'd call in lawyers, clear her name in the press, but Helena didn't want that. She just wanted him, fully present, no excuses. "Are you ready for this?" she wrote, eyes filled with tears. He didn't answer right away. He hung, up in silence, torn between reason and feeling. He was used to hiding behind the elegant neutrality his position demanded, but now there was someone who saw him completely, and he had to decide if he still wanted to remain invisible where it mattered most. The next morning, Damien showed up at the school with tired eyes. Helena welcomed him in the empty library. He walked up slowly, picked up a whiteboard marker, and wrote, "I was a coward. You deserve more." She read it, her heart aching, but also hopeful. "I want to change. For me, for you, for us. Helena wiped the board clean, then wrote beneath it, then prove it, with actions, with listening, with truth. And he nodded, not trying to argue. He knew that was the only acceptable answer. In the days that followed, he stepped away from the cameras and leaned into the cause. He visited local families, listened to stories, and restructured the development project. He made it clear the school would not be demolished, it would be supported. And he began planning something new, something with purpose, an educational center with full accessibility, inspired by her. When he told Helena about the new plan, she didn't cry. She simply wrote, "Now, yes, you're starting to hear me." Damien smiled, feeling a lightness he hadn't felt in years, and he realized that sometimes you have to lose control to gain what truly matters: listening, love, and the truth of who we really are. The following week, Helena organized a reading circle in the neighborhood square. Damien showed up by surprise, sitting on the ground like everyone else. He wasn't wearing a suit, had no bodyguards, just a notebook for quiet notes. During the activity, a student invited him to participate in a sign language exercise. He accepted, and even with clumsy gestures, he brought genuine smiles from the children. Helena watched with silently emotional eyes. That man, once distant and closed off, was now allowing himself to make mistakes, learn, and connect. When the gathering ended, she approached with a wildflower in her hand. She wrote, "Thank you for being an example. They see it. And so do I." Damien held the flower gently, as if carrying a piece of something he didn't yet know how to name. That night he wrote a letter and left it at the school's door before sunrise. Helena found it when she arrived. "You taught me that love doesn't shout. It listens, it respects, it stays." She tucked the note into her journal, between worn pages of favorite poems, and in that quiet gesture, something settled in her. He was beginning to deserve her heart. From the top of the company building, Damien looked at the city with new eyes. The world still made noise, but he had learned to filter what truly mattered. He no longer wanted to just be heard, he wanted to listen. And maybe in this new rhythm, love didn't have to rush. It just had to be present and whole. The relationship between Damien and Helena was beginning to take shape, delicate and steady, like a newly built bridge. There were no labels, no grand promises or declarations, only presence, listening, and a quiet building of something real. He kept visiting the school, supporting projects, and studying sign language with genuine dedication. She, in turn, allowed herself to smile more often, even without saying a word. But like all beginnings, shadows hovered at the edge of the light. Rebecca, Damien's ex-fiancée, found out about the new connection through a social column. She refused to be left behind, especially not for a deaf school teacher from a humble neighborhood. Using her media contacts, she arranged an interview where she implied Damien was using the relationship to clean up the company's image. The story gained traction, accompanied by out-of-context photos of Damien and Helena together. Within hours, social media exploded. Helena was tagged in cruel posts. With ableist jokes and offensive comments, students began asking questions, teachers grew tense, and parents became concerned. The school administration called a meeting to address the exposure of the institution. Helena arrived before everyone else, sitting in silence, eyes fixed on nothing. Inside, she was fighting the urge to run. Damien heard about it while attending a conference in Chicago. When he saw the headlines, he didn't think twice. He caught the next flight home. He arrived at the school late in the afternoon, exhausted but determined. He found Helena in the reading room, alone, her eyes red from exhaustion and frustration. She didn't have to speak. He felt her pain before she even looked up. He tried to explain, but she raised her hand, asking for silence. She wrote on. "Paper, you don't have to protect me. Just stand beside me, publicly." Damien hesitated. He knew what that meant. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about standing for something. And he was still afraid of exposure. Helena stood, grabbed her bag and wrote, "If you still need to hide who we are, then we are nothing." She walked out without looking back, heartbroken, but with her dignity intact. Damien stayed there, alone, staring at the chair where she had sat, and feeling the heaviest kind of silence, the silence of her absence. In the following days, he tried calling, sent messages, waited outside the school. Helena didn't answer a single attempt. She focused entirely on her classes and students. She smiled for the kids, but couldn't hide the sadness in her eyes. Some students noticed. One left a note on her desk. "We know when you're sad." Damien turned to his father, a stern man who had never shown emotion. He told him everything about Helena, his feelings, and the fear of being vulnerable. Surprisingly, his father simply replied, "If you found someone who challenges you to be better, don't run. I ran, and I regret it." It was the first honest conversation they'd had in years. That same day, Damien resigned as CEO of the holding company. He announced he would remain an investor, but step down from the executive role. The decision shocked the board, shareholders, and the media. But to him, it made perfect sense. It was time to rebuild his own identity, one aligned with what Helena had awakened in him. The next week, he returned to the school, not in a suit, but in a plain t-shirt, holding a folder. He asked to speak with the students in the library. With the principal's permission, he gave a brief speech in sign language. His hands trembled, he made mistakes, paused often, but he spoke from the heart. At the end, he signed, "I'm here because listening changed my life." Helena watched from afar, hidden behind the half-open door. Tears ran silently down her cheeks. She hadn't expected perfection, only truth. And in that imperfect effort, there was more love than any rehearsed speech could carry. She clutched her notebook to her chest and took a deep breath. After the presentation, Damien waited outside. Helena approached in silence, her steps hesitant. He said nothing. He simply reached out and signed slowly. "Sorry, I listened too. Late, but I did listen." She smiled, holding back her emotions, and wrote, "Maybe it wasn't late, just right on time." They walked together to the little square across from the school and sat side by side on the wooden bench. For long minutes, they said nothing. The wind played with the leaves, and the city sounds faded into the background. Damien pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket, the letter he had written days ago but never sent. Helena read it slowly. Each line, a confession. "I was afraid to acknowledge you, because I never even acknowledged myself. But today, I want to show you who I really am. No armor, no shields. You're the first person who truly heard me, and now all I want is to hear you every day." Helena closed her eyes, taking in every word with her heart. When she opened them, he was still, watching her, uncertain. She wrote, "Then listen when I say, I haven't given up on you." And for the first time since it all happened, they smiled together. A timid smile, bittersweet, but full of hope. Because some stories don't need an ending. They deserve a new beginning. That night, Helena arrived home and sat on the couch with her journal in her lap. With trembling hands, she wrote, "He came back, different, more real, maybe regretful, maybe just ready." The words came slowly, like someone translating what the heart still fears to feel. But deep down, she knew something had changed in him and in her. The silence between them was no longer distance. It was a pause to rebuild. Damien, on the other side of the city, stared at a once white wall now filled with post-its of sign language. There were the words that mattered most: listening, respect, courage, presence, truth. He picked up a pen and added one more at the center: Helena. It was for her that he was learning to become a better man, Not the man the world expected, but the one she brought to life. In the days that followed, Damien didn't rush anything. He showed up at the school, helped with events, observed from a respectful distance. He knew that regaining trust didn't require grand gestures, but consistency. Helena slowly began to include him in her daily moments. They started over. No rush, no promises, but with honesty. One Saturday, she invited him to help organize books for a charity bazaar. They worked side by side for hours, laughing, moving boxes, getting their hands dirty. At the end, they sat on the floor, exhausted, surrounded by worn-out pages and forgotten stories. Damien looked at her and wrote on a piece of cardboard, "If you were a book, you'd be the one that changes the life of whoever reads it." Helena held the cardboard, eyes misty, and wrote back, "And you'd be the one no one expected, but becomes the favorite." They smiled. No audience, no spotlight, no masks, just two hearts that had survived the noise and chosen to stay in the safe silence of learning to listen and love. The morning sun poured through the school windows, warming the worn floor of the library. Damien arrived early, before the students, holding a leather folder and a light heart. Helena waited between the shelves, hair tied up, a shy smile on her lips. He didn't speak. He simply signed, "Good morning." She replied, gently signing back, "Today is a good day." In the folder, Damien carried the new architectural project redesigning the entire neighborhood space. The school would be preserved and expanded, with a cultural center inspired by Helena's work. Everything was approved with community support, without media noise. He laid the papers on the table, pointing to the plaque at the center. Helena, Duarte Center for Literature and Inclusion. Helena's eyes widened, her hand covering her mouth in surprise. Then she wrote, "Why?" Damien responded in sign language, with some difficulty. "Because what you do changes lives, including mine." She couldn't hold back the tears, and didn't try to hide them. After school, they walked to the corner cafe and shared a simple slice of cake. Damien told childhood stories, gesturing slowly and laughing at his own mistakes in Libras. Helena corrected him, made faces when he got signs wrong. Everything was light. They looked like two kids learning to play in a language of their own, and in the silence, there was peace. As they left, Damien invited her for a Sunday outing. No big plans, no expectations, just the two of them. Helena hesitated, but accepted with a subtle nod. She wasn't ready for declarations, but she no longer wanted to run. And he respected that with the patience of someone who knows love is built slowly. On Sunday, they went to a park outside the city. They sat on the grass, watching families, children running, leaves dancing in the wind. Helena brought a poetry book and handed it to him. Damien read aloud, then wrote in a notebook, "This is the first time I've read something out loud without feeling judged." Helena looked at him for a few seconds, then wrote, "That's because I don't hear your voice, I hear your heart." And that was, without a doubt, the most beautiful compliment he'd ever received. They sat side by side for long minutes, simply feeling the breeze and each other's presence. Nothing was urgent. Everything was enough. The following week, Helena was invited to an interview at a prestigious university. They had read about her work and wanted to offer her a research scholarship. Damien was proud, but didn't say much. He knew this was her moment. He simply wrote, "Fly, and if needed, I'll learn to fly too." She traveled for 3 days to visit the campus and present her community library project. When she returned, she found a note from Damien at her door. "While you were growing, I waited for you, happy, knowing you'll go as far as you want." And inside, Helena cried softly, hugging the note as if it said 1,000 things. And in truth, it did. Damien began offering volunteer workshops at the school about accessible entrepreneurship. He spoke to teens about the market, but always ended by saying, "Nothing is more valuable than learning to hear those no one listens to." The students admired him and the parents began thanking him with sincere gratitude. And Helena, she watched him with quiet pride. One night, during a community reading event, Helena was honored by former students. They shared how she had changed their lives with words, gestures, and belief. Damien applauded with emotion, sitting in the last row, eyes glassy. At the end, he stepped onto the stage and for the first time in public gave a speech in sign language. Shy, simple, and unforgettable. This woman taught me that love doesn't speak. It listens, it respects, it stays. The audience rose in silent applause, hands raised, spinning in the air, the universal Libra's sign. Helena stood frozen, her soul trembling. In that gesture, he had exposed what he felt without a single spoken word, and she knew he truly heard her, in a way no one else ever had. After the event, Damien found her in the hallway, between books and soft lighting. He held her hands and signed slowly, eyes steady. "I love you," in the most silent and deepest way there is. Helena took a deep breath, then wrote, "Then listen, I love you too." That same night, Helena returned home and opened her journal. She wrote, slowly, as if recording not a fact, but a feeling that must not be lost. "Today, he heard me say, 'I love you,' without sound, and I heard him say it back, with his eyes." The words danced on the page between quiet smiles and honest tears. She didn't know where this would lead them, but she knew she wanted to keep walking beside him. Damien, meanwhile, spent the night reviewing the signs he had studied. He wanted to communicate better, with fluency, with ease, not out of obligation, but admiration. In that woman he had found the most human and true version of himself, and he never wanted to go back to who he was before. In the following days, they shared their routine lightly. Coffee on the sidewalk, notes tucked inside books, a silent gesture in the school hallway. Nothing needed to be grand, to be intense. They had discovered the rarest language of all, attentive care, and in it, their hearts danced in perfect sync. One afternoon, a student asked Damien if he was Ms. Helena's boyfriend. He smiled, looked at Helena watching from afar, and answered sincerely, "I'm the man lucky enough to learn from her every day." The child didn't quite understand, but smiled too. And Helena, eyes filled with tears, knew love was exactly that. On Friday, Helena found an envelope on her desk. Inside, a handmade invitation. "Dinner on the rooftop, no rush, just us." Signed with a drawing of an ear and a heart. She laughed softly and replied with a note, "Yes, with my whole heart." The dinner took place under string lights and a table decorated with simple flowers. Damien prepared everything himself, following tutorial videos for basic recipes. They messed up the pasta and laughed like teenagers, then danced without music, guided only by their breathing and a soft touch. And in that silence full of everything, they allowed themselves to simply feel. At the end of the night, Helena wrote in her notebook, "You didn't have to promise me anything. You just had to stay." Damien leaned his forehead to hers and slowly signed, "Staying will always be my favorite sound." And there, under the dark sky and with peaceful hearts, they discovered that love also lives in silence. It was the beginning of spring when Helena arrived at school and found a box on her desk. Inside was a hardcover book with a dedication in Braille and golden letters. "Invisible Voices, Chronicles of the Silent Library." Upon opening it, she recognized her students' writings, poems, letters, and memories collected over the years. At the end of the book, a note signed by Damien, "To the woman who taught me to hear what no one says." Helena pressed the book to her chest, letting the tears fall without hurry. Each page was an echo of her mission, her fight, her silent giving. And now it had all taken form. Recognition. Love. She knew only someone who truly listened, could see so deeply. And there between paper and ink was a printed heart. The school was preparing a community event for Inclusion Day, and Helena would be honored. Damien helped behind the scenes, far from the spotlight, organizing logistics, safety, and structure. He didn't want a speech nor applause. He just wanted to see her shine. On the day, the square filled with parents, students, artists, and neighbors. It was more than an event. It was a collective thank you to the woman who transformed lives in silence. Helena arrived wearing a light blue dress, simple, with her hair down. When she stepped on stage, the audience stood in silent applause. Hands raised, turning like stars. She placed a hand on her chest, deeply moved, and signed her gratitude. Then read a piece written by one of her students. Being heard doesn't depend on sound. It depends on who chooses to listen with the heart. At the end, Damien appeared with a small wooden box in his hands. He asked for the microphone, then handed it to an interpreter, and began signing. For years, I spoke without knowing what. I was saying, today I speak with my whole body because someone taught me. He opened the box and took out a small metal sculpture, a hand making the sign for love. He gave it to Helena in front of everyone, and the square fell into an emotional hush. Helena couldn't hold back the tears. She held the sculpture gently and wrote on paper, "This is the most beautiful gesture anyone has ever given me." Then held the note up for the crowd to see, and once again everyone applauded, with their hands in the air like stars in motion. That night, back at the school, Helena and Damien sat in the empty library. He watched her as she read the book, for the third time, with tender and proud eyes. "You really didn't have to do all of this," she wrote. Damien replied, "Maybe I did, to show you just how much you mean to me." And she just smiled, unsure what to say. He pulled a folded envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. Helena opened it gently, finding a handwritten letter inside. "You were poetry even when I was still stone. Today, I want to be a verse with you." She covered her face, laughing through her tears, and wrote back, "Then let's be a book, one chapter a day, together." The days that followed were light, full of little gestures. Coffee left in her classroom, notes hidden between books, conversations at sunset, walks in silence through the streets of Brooklyn. And always, always, the attentive gaze, the genuine listening, the touch that spoke more than words. It was love, not loud, but steady like roots. At the end of the month, Damien announced the launch of a publishing house focused on authors with disabilities. He wanted to give a voice to those who had long been ignored. He named the project Signs, in honor of the language that had transformed him. Helena would be the literary curator, and together they would give a stage to those who only needed to be truly heard. At the launch ceremony, Helena stepped onto the stage beside him. They didn't use a microphone. Together, they signed a short phrase in perfect synchrony. "Everyone has something to say. What's missing is someone who knows how to listen." The entire audience stood, deeply moved, raising their hands in a silent applause. After the event, they walked hand in hand down a cobblestone street. Damien looked at her and signed, "If I could, I'd go back in time just to hear you sooner." Helena smiled, squeezing his hand a little tighter, and responded with a simple, honest, love-filled sign. "You arrived at the perfect time, the time of the heart." Their world was still the same, chaotic, noisy, full of pressures. But now they had a place where they could meet without noise, a place where hands spoke, eyes listened, and hearts understood. They didn't need promises of forever, just the certainty that here, no one was alone anymore. Damien often wrote at night when the city finally quieted. On a blank page, he scribbled the sentence that wouldn't leave his chest. "Loving you is learning to hear the world in different frequencies." He tucked the note into the drawer beside the bed, and fell asleep with a smile. In the silence, he now called home. The next morning, Helena walked through the school with the book in her hands. Some students stopped her in the hallway asking for autographs on the pages where they were mentioned. She laughed, hugged each one, and realized how powerful words were, even the ones no one could hear. The library stayed full all day, with curious young minds eager to listen with their eyes. And at the back of the room, Damien watched, it all with crossed arms and a light heart. That night, as they sipped tea on her porch, Helena pointed to the stars. She wrote in her notepad, "Sometimes I think we were born in different worlds." Damien looked up then at her and replied, "Maybe we were, but I chose to live in yours." She smiled, and in that moment understood that belonging doesn't need sound, it needs surrender. The days that followed were about building, not just a relationship, but a new language between souls. Each gesture he made was a new poem. Each shared silence was a punctuation-free love letter, and with every signed good night, Helena felt she would never again sleep alone in the world, because someone finally heard her, even in what she never said. One rainy afternoon, Damien surprised her with a room at the new publishing house. It was just for her, full of books, plants, natural light, and a golden plaque on the door. Helena Duarte Reading Room, where words know how to listen. Helena said nothing, she just cried. And once again, he understood everything. At the end of that day, sitting on the floor of the still unfinished space, they shared cold pizza. Between laughter and intertwined hands, Helena wrote her favorite sentence in her notebook. "Some stories don't need to be read aloud to be eternal." Damien touched her face gently and signed back, "Ours is one of them." Time passed, as it always does in healing stories, unhurried, but leaving deep marks. The publishing house Signs had already released 3 books by disabled authors, all curated by Helena. Damien had become a quiet inclusion advocate, doing without fanfare, but with impact. The school had grown, gained new classrooms, more students, more dreams, and in the midst of all that, their love remained quiet but unshakable on a spring. Saturday, Helena woke up to find an envelope under the door. Inside, a handwritten note with firm, emotional penmanship. "Today, I don't want to impress you. I just want to listen to you say yes." At the bottom of the page, a simple drawing. 2 hands intertwined, forming the sign for forever. Helena smiled and brought her hand to her chest. The yes had been beating there for a long time. The ceremony took place on the rooftop of the new publishing house at sunset. Few guests, all close, no flashes, no long speeches, no extravagance. Helena wore a light dress, hair loose, barefoot. Damien wore a white shirt, eyes soft, posture of a man who had finally unlearned pride. Between them, only a notebook and a pair of hands speaking what mattered most. She wrote, "I never imagined getting married without hearing the vows, but with you, I hear everything." He signed slowly, tears in his eyes. "I never thought love would be someone listening me into becoming." They sealed the moment with a silent kiss, while recycled paper petals flew through the air. And in that simplicity were all the vows that fit inside a real love. After the ceremony, they danced, without music, only the sound of breathing, muffled, laughter, and the wind through their hair. School students performed a poetry piece in Libras as a tribute. Damien and Helena were moved from beginning to end. In that space, everyone spoke the same language, the language of empathy. The following week, they traveled to a secluded cabin among trees and a lake. No internet, no phones, just books and the sound of nature. They spoke through glances, touches, quiet laughter, and long embraces. One afternoon, they wrote a poem together about what it means to love in silence. They published it on the publishing house's website, and it went viral. Helena won a national award for education, and inclusion. In her speech, she declined the microphone and signed to the camera. I dedicate this recognition to the man who heard me even without understanding everything, and to all those still waiting to be heard. Your voice has value even if the world pretends to be deaf. The audience responded with visual applause, and Damien cried again. At home, they began working on a new project, a free cultural center for children with disabilities. Helena would lead literature and creative expression workshops. Damien would handle management and partnerships with other institutions. The name of the place? Voices That Touch, because there, no one needed to speak loudly to change the world. One evening, while organizing boxes of books, Helena found an old notebook. It was the one she'd used when she first met Damien, the day of the accident. The first pages held cold, brief notes, but at the end, hearts, dates, excerpts from letters, and a highlighted phrase, "He saw me, he heard me, and I chose to stay." Damien came up behind her and hugged her, resting his chin on her shoulder. She held his hand and signed, "Thank you for not giving up on learning." He kissed her shoulder in response and whispered something she didn't hear, but felt, because his body said it all, and she, more than anyone, knew how to listen to what's never spoken. On the porch, with 2 warm coffees and blankets on their knees, they talked about the future. Kids, trips, projects, pauses. But above all, they made one promise: to keep listening to each other, even when life got loud. Because in the end, love is this: choosing to listen, even when it's hard. One day, Helena wrote a piece for her students. It was called "The Sound of Love." It read, "The sound of love isn't in the voice. It's in the presence. It's in the gesture. It's in not giving up. It's in the one who learns to listen to us even when we don't understand ourselves." Damien read it in silence, heart full and smiling, then signed next to it, "With love, the man who learned to listen out of love." Helena, emotional, added a sticky note at the end of the page, "And who today is my peace." He kept the text like someone preserving a home. Time passed, but their love didn't fade. It simply matured, growing roots and bearing fruit. They didn't need daily declarations, just a thoughtfully made coffee, a touch before sleep, a comfortable silence. Damien never wanted to be the man who controlled everything again. He just wanted to be, every day, the man who listens. In the final scene of that chapter of their lives, they sat side by side, reading the same book. They shared pages and glances. They said nothing, and said everything. Because love, there, no longer needed sound. Some loves don't make noise. They arrive in silence, grow through care, and bloom through listening. Damien and Helena remind us that love isn't about fancy words. It's about being present with an open heart, willing to hear even what goes unsaid. Because in the end, true love doesn't shout, it embraces, it stays. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment sharing the part that moved you the most. Like this video, it helps this message of love and listening reach even more people. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they deserve to be heard exactly as they are. Subscribe to the channel to follow stories that heal, transform, and remind us that silence can say, "I love you," too. Because here, every story is a gentle reminder. What truly matters speaks straight to the heart.